Well, good afternoon. I am Pastor Michelle at Harmony Creek Church, and today is Sunday, June 15th, and this is my sermon. In case you were not able to be at church, I wanted to go ahead and record my sermon that I did this morning. And my sermon this morning is coming from the text of 1 Samuel chapter 3, verses 1 through 10, and I thought I would go ahead and read the passage. Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord under Eli. The word of the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were not widespread. At that time Eli, whose eyesight had begun to grow dim so that he could not see, was lying down in his room. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called, "Samuel, Samuel." And he said, "Here I am," and ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But Eli said, "I did not call, so lie down again." "Here I am, for you." The Lord called again, "Samuel, Samuel." And he got up and went to Eli, and Eli said, "No, here." And Eli said, "I did not call, my son. Go lie down again." Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. The Lord called Samuel again a third time, and he got up and went to Eli. And Eli said, and Eli perceived that the Lord was calling the boy. Therefore Eli said to Samuel, "Go lie down, and if he calls you, you shall say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Now the Lord came and stood there, calling as before, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel said, "Speak, for your servant is listening." So this is a fun story, right? This is one that some of us may be familiar with. It's a story where the prophet Samuel is called by God, but doesn't recognize the call by God. He doesn't quite understand what he is hearing. So that's why I thought we would start with a fun little story to begin. So Lois goes to the doctor and complains that her husband, Lane, can't hear her. The doctor asks, "How bad is it?" And Lois says she's not sure. So the doctor tells her, "Let's test your husband. Stand 20 feet away from him and say something. If he doesn't hear you, get closer and say the same thing. Keep moving closer and closer and repeating the comment until he does hear you. That way we will have an idea of their range of hearing loss." So Lois goes home and sees Lane in the kitchen chopping up vegetables for dinner. From 20 feet away, Lane asks, "What are we having for dinner?" No answer. From 10 feet, same thing. From 5 feet, no answer. Finally, Lois is standing right behind him and says, "What's for dinner?" And her husband, Lane, turns around and looks at his wife and says, "Honey, for the 4th time, beef stew." That's a good one, isn't it? Okay. So speaking of having trouble hearing, or perhaps it's more on the issue with understanding what you are hearing, let's turn our attention to 1 Samuel from the Hebrew text. Now, from the beginning of his life, Samuel had a special call, I believe. We're told Samuel's birth story in the first chapter of 1 Samuel. Samuel's mom, Hannah, had been barren for many years, so Hannah went to the temple day after day, begging and praying for God to give her a baby. And finally she did. She did get pregnant, and she gave birth to a baby boy, and she chose to dedicate him to the temple. And so Samuel went on to live at the temple. So that's where we find Samuel in this part of this book. Samuel was living at the temple. He was ministering to the Lord under the guidance of Eli. Now, Barbara Brown Taylor, she describes what Samuel's life in the temple might have looked like. She says, "We can only guess what it was like for Samuel as the faithful brought their burnt offerings, their sin offerings, and their guilt offerings to the temple. They were burdened, ashen-faced people, most of them, hauling their stubborn animals up to the altar to be killed. There was a great deal of blood splashed on the altar and blood sprinkled on the veil that separated the Holy of Holies from the rest of the sanctuary. The burning incense did battle with the smell but could not beat it. The place stank. No getting around it. Maybe Samuel tended the cauldron where the sacrificial meat was boiled, or helped Eli locate the portion he was allowed to eat as the temple priest. Maybe Samuel was allowed to feed on some of the scraps himself. There was little else for a growing boy to eat. And at night he lay down by the ark of God, the legendary throne of the invisible Yahweh that Israel carried into battle at the head of her armies. It was reputed to contain all the sacred relics of the nations past. Sleeping next to it had to be like sleeping in a graveyard or under a volcano. End quote. That's an interesting description of what Samuel must have experienced and what it might have been like for Samuel living in the temple day after day. Our story this morning, it involves the call upon Samuel's life, this call to be a prophet. And a prophet is essentially someone who is called, who is asked to speak for God. And it's no small thing that God chose Samuel, because Samuel would have been considered an outside, and that, let's just face it, that's on point for God and how God operates. Because you see, Eli's sons are from the priestly line, and it is their birthright to serve in the temple. Yet, Eli's sons were a big old mess. They had not acted justly, and they had used their position for gain instead of service to the Lord. So God instead chooses to speak through an outsider, a young man named Samuel. And as we think about it, there's a lot going on in this text, right? Because we see Samuel being confused, not understanding who's calling him. But we also see that Eli also can't see very well. It says his eyes are dim. And I love that it says in this passage that the lamp of God has still not gone out. Which we could say that for today, right? That the light of God is still burning bright, even though we can't always see it. But when we think about this story, I think about the fact that rarely does God do what we expect God to do. If that was the case, we'd be getting our way a lot more, right? And how often does God choose outsiders and those on the margins to continue God's work? Just think of Jesus himself. Jesus was born to a virgin teenager mother, Mary, who was an outsider even of herself, and Jesus himself was an outsider. It's been said that he probably didn't have a home, that he went town to town and kind of was able to get housing and lodging from hospitable people. But in many ways, in many aspects, Jesus himself was also an outsider. He was the ultimate outsider. But the thing is, this is how God often chooses to work. And we see this over and over throughout Scripture. God speaks through those we least expect. God shows up. And Samuel was the outsider prophet who was chosen to step into the mess that was Israel and bravely and courageously speak for God. And what I find interesting, at the very beginning of this passage that we hear, it says, and this is something to keep in mind. Let's think about this. We're told that the word of the Lord was rare in those days. It was rare. And I got to thinking about that all week long as I was preparing for this. What does it mean? What does that look like? Why was it rare? And I got to wonder, was it really rare? Or were people just not paying attention or listening? Were people looking for God's voice in the places where they expect it to be, not in the places they don't expect it to be? I think of the song by Train. There's a song by the musical group Train, and it's called Calling All Angels. But I like to change the title to Calling All Prophets. And I think the song perhaps speaks to what the world was like during Samuel's time, and even, as we'll talk further, what the world is like for us now. Just hear some of these lyrics. I need a sign to let me know you're here. All of these lines are being crossed over the atmosphere. I need to know that things are going to look up. So I feel us drowning in the sea spilled from a cup. When there is no place safe and no safe place to put my head. When you can feel the world shake from the words that are said. And I'm calling all the prophets. Calling all prophets. I need a sign to let me know you're here, because my TV set just keeps it all from being clear. I want a reason for the way things have to be. I need a hand to help build up some kind of hope inside of me. I'm calling all prophets. I won't give up if you don't give up. I won't give up if you don't give up. I'm calling all prophets. End quote. I think it speaks to us today, right? That I need a sign to let me know you're here. How many times have we thought about that when it comes to God? How many times, at least for me, have I thought that? God, I need a sign that you're working still, that you're in this with us, that you're speaking still. And we wonder, right? Is God even still speaking? The UCC has that motto that, God is still speaking. And is God still speaking? And the thing is, I think God is still speaking. And louder than I've ever seen God speak. And the problem is, we don't always recognize it because God is speaking in the ways that we don't expect. God is speaking through those on the margins. God is speaking through the people showing up for the protests and making the really creative protest signs, right? God is speaking even through people that we may not agree with. God is still very much present in this world, and God is present through all of us, through every single one of us. Because here's the thing, I believe every single one of us, we are called to be prophets. We are called to speak for God. We are called to be co-creators of a better world. And I know this task of being a prophet may seem daunting, but speaking for God and sometimes just showing up as your most authentic self is all that we have to do. Because the thing is, that's how God shows up in this world. God doesn't show up in any other way except through us. Perhaps in nature too, but my point is that's how God shows up. God shows up through us. And I saw that loud and clear yesterday when I attended the No Kings protest in downtown Dayton. And I was reminded there as everyone around me had their protest signs and we started, people started saying things from the microphone and up front. And all these people present to fight for democracy. It reminded me of just how loud God is still speaking. We just sometimes have trouble seeing it. And I was just so moved. I was so moved that people, yesterday, all over the country, people were showing up to do these protests, right? And it's it's an interesting time we live in, right? And it reminded me, and I will just say this, it reminded me of the story of Palm Sunday, when we have Jesus coming into town on a donkey, right? The most humble ways. And then on the other side of town, we have Pontius Pilate coming in this military strong parade. And yesterday we had two different parades happening, right? Two different types of parades or marches, so to speak. We had people protesting the No Kings, and then perhaps we had a little more kingly of a parade that was happening in our nation's capital. But that's one way that we show up to be prophets in this world. And I will say that showing up, making signs, yes, that's a way to practice being a prophet, but not the only way. We can practice being prophets just by showing up each day and showing up as our most authentic self. We can practice being prophets by even just opening a door for someone. We can practice being prophets by sending an encouraging text to someone. We can practice being prophets by watching where you spend your money and making sure we're creating opportunities for small businesses. And I say that to preach myself just as much as anyone, because in all transparency, I struggle to shop at small businesses as much as I should. I shop on Amazon still, way too much. But there's so many ways to show up and be a prophet. Howard Thurman says, don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. End quote. And that is what the world needs. People who have come alive. And what does that look like? For you, what does being a prophet look like for you? I think it looks different for everyone. And you know what? That's the point. You think about what skills or what things you bring to the table and use those skills. That's something I used to tell our youth when I was at David's for so long, when I taught confirmation. Figure out what drives you, what are you passionate about, and use that to make a difference. If you're passionate about sewing or crocheting or cooking or anything, then you find ways to use that to bring about change in your world, or even just through your job. If you're a nurse, if you're a doctor, if you're a lawyer, if you're a receptionist, if you're a stay-at-home mom, if you're a garbage collector, I'm listing all these jobs, police officer, so and so on. Be the best police officer, garbage collector, all that. Be the best that you can be in those positions. And maybe that's one way you can fight for justice as well. One way that you can practice being a prophet. But the point is, friends, is that we must never give up. Because we are working to create a better world. But not just for us. We're doing this for our kids, for our grandkids, for so many generations that will come after us. Calling all prophets. That means us. That means us. So my friends, God bless you. God bless you. And may you never, ever, ever forget that you are a prophet too. You, as you are right now in this moment, you can be a prophet and you can speak for God. You can act for God in this world. And the world desperately needs more prophets. So are you going to rise to the call? Or are you going to stay in bed? Much love to all of you, my friends.